Good evening, students. Let us continue with the discussion on some of the important aspects in ethics, integrity, and aptitude for civil service. In this regard, yesterday we have discussed this. This is a very important thing, very pertinent thing. Already they have asked a question with respect to Official Secret Act. So, what are the hindrances for transparency? What are the hindrances for information sharing in India? These are from the larger government perspective. These are the things which hinder the information sharing. Say, for example, your conduct rules. They prohibit communication of official document. Indian Evidence Act prohibits giving evidence from unpublished official record. And we have got oath of secrecy for ministers. All these hinders. We have discussed these things. Let us continue. Okay. But another important thing, what is the difference between responsibility and accountability? A very important concept. A question may be asked, and also it is very, very pertinent to understand what exactly is accountability. Dear students, can you come up with some points? Try to, because like why I say is, when you try, you will remember the things for longer duration. Can anyone tell me the difference? Okay, let me give you some important clues also in this regard. Now, okay, I will begin. Responsibility and accountability. Dear students, responsibility correspond to the same things which are there in the same color on the slide. Responsibility is self-imposed. Responsibility is self-imposed. Accountability is imposed by an external agent. It is externally imposed. Is this clear to you? Responsibility is self-imposed. You are imposing. Parents have responsibility. It is nobody is saying them. They are willing on their own. Right? Responsibility is based on the value system. Responsibility is based on the value system. On the other hand, accountability is based on the rules, the regulations, the law, your code of ethics, code of conduct, the professional values, orders, procedures. All these things impose accountability. What is a punishment? If one is not taking the responsibility, a sense of guilt, sense of guilt, shame. You feel bad for yourself, having not done the thing which you have to do. Say, for example, looking after the elderly parents in India is the responsibility of the children. There are many who are not taking this responsibility, but they still have a kind of guilt within them. And responsibility is subjective. On the other hand, accountability is objective, because there you have got definite procedure, rules, regulations. Right? In the overall, you can say that there is an element of answerability. There is an element of answerability in accountability. And there is an external enforcement mechanism if the things go wrong. These are conspicuously not present in responsibility. Right? Is it clear? Very important. Please note these things. I'll be telling more number of points, so I'll be going little fast. I would have like wind up the things by giving few points, but rather than that, I'll be giving more number of points and I'll be like fast. Okay. Integrity pacts, a very important thing. Integrity pact, it has been mentioned in second ARC. What is this integrity pact? Integrity pact refers to an agreement between the public agency involved in procuring the goods and services and the bidder of public contract. So it is a pact between whom? Between the public agency which is involved in procuring the things, which is involved in providing the goods and services, and the person, the bidder, the contractor. Is it clear? Integrity pact refers to an agreement between the public agency and the contractor, right? Why? What is the content of integrity pact? That the bidder have not paid and shall not pay any illegal gratification to secure the contract in question. Very simple, very authenticated according to second ARC. So here, both the parties, they are in an agreement where they explicitly say that they have not been involved in any illegal gratification, right? Next. Please note the examples. These are very, very important. They are given in second ARC. In India, we have got Integrity Pact. In fact, ONGC is the first PSU public sector undertaking to have signed a MOU with Transparency International India and the CVC, Central Vigilance Commission, in 2006. It's the first PU public sector. Not only that, all the defense contracts and procurements value more than 300 crores will be having integrity pacts. Is this clear to you? These are the two examples you have to mention. Then what are the hindrances? What are the limitations with respect to integrity pacts? Number one, integrity pacts are new kind of agreements. These were previously not present. So there is a chance of collision. There's a chance of collision, or in many cases opposition, with respect to many acts which are already there. Say for example, Indian Contract Act, Prevention of Corruption Act. So in Prevention of Corruption Act, there is no mention of Integrity Act because integrity pacts are recent one. So second ARC says that first we have to identify the type of transactions requiring integrity pact. So first you identify, is integrity pacts are feasible in a given circumstance. Then to provide for a protocol for entering into integrity pact. So in a systematic way, you should have a protocol, you should have a procedure, you should have methods to enter them. And second ARC says that if needed, amend in the existing legal framework to make integrity pact enforceable. Integrity pacts, sometimes they collide and there is a lot of ambiguity. If they are not enforceable, second ARC says that please amend the existing legal framework, amend the laws and acts which are already present. Right? First of all, identify the transaction which is requiring integrity pact, then provide a protocol, provide a procedure for that, then Since it is conflicting the other policies, please do amend those things. Okay. Next, right to information. Why right to information? Why do we need right to information? In this regard, a question. Right to information is a basic necessity for good governance. Why? This is a question from second ARC. And also UPSC has also asked a question in this regard. Right to Information Act is not all about citizens' empowerment alone. Means it is about citizen empowerment, but not only citizen empowerment, it is essentially redefining the concept of accountability. Dear students, can anyone just can think of the answer? What is the crux they are asking for? How it is redefining the concept of accountability. So how it is redefining the concept of accountability? The answer for this is by providing information accessible, by providing the information which is accessible to the people, it is bringing a new dimension into the concept of accountability. In the ultimate analysis, in governance, all the public functionaries are accountable to the people. Here, by providing the information, it is providing a weapon in the hands of the people. Say, for example, there is a road. You can go and ask, what is the cost? Who is the contractor? What was the way in which contract was given to others? So it gives a tool, weapon in the hands of the people. Right? So other things like it makes transparent, all these things. But the gist is this one. Because they are directly asking in the UPSC, it essentially redefining the concept of accountability. Accountability will be in the form of procedures, rules, regulations. Now they have added another dimension, that is where people can hold others accountable. So this is a very, very important aspect, and also you can add this information. Accountability mechanisms in India, these are the things, as you are aware, Right to Information Act is one of the most effective mechanisms. And here, they're outside the state. They're outside the state, vertical accountability. This point you have to mention, right? RTI, right to information, is a basic necessity for good governance. Why? You have to interconnect all the points, like it leads to transparency. When the things are transparent, we can evaluate objectively. It increases objectivity. When the things are more transparent, accountability to the people increases. When people have more information, it increases the predictability. When people know what is happening, why is happening, who are there, how is it happening, it increases the participation of the people. The very crux of democracy. It leads to empowerment and welfare of the people, right? You have to just elaborate these things. See, these are the things which we come across in good governance, right? So you interlink all these things. Very straightforward question. Next, Right to Information Act is a paradigm shift in the administration. It is a path-breaking legislation which signals the march of darkness of secrecy to the dawn of transparency. It is a paradigm shift. Why? Because Right to Information Act means here it is a one which is by an act of parliament. When you when the information, when the act itself says that information should be given without any condition, easily accessible, as you are aware, rules are the things which are made by your executive. But when something is in the form of act or law, it is made by the legislature. Then executive has no choice other than just to implement that one, right? Next, what is the importance of Right to Information Act? Already we have discussed this. Right to information law helps to arrest the alienation of people from administration. How? How right to information helps to arrest the alienation of the people from the administration? Because when the people know what is going on, when the people have administration, they feel themselves part of that. When they don't know how the laws are made, how the contracts are given, what is going on, they will be alienated from the government. So that is one thing. Because of this, corruption will be checked. Because of this, there will be participation in the democracy. By this way, citizens will be involved in decision making, right? Here, please understand here. Now we are discussing about Right to Information Act 2005. What is the scope of Right to Information Act? What are the things which are covered in Right to Information Act? Dear students, Right to Information Act is a very comprehensive and it covers almost all matters of governance and has a widest possible reach. This is a very, very important thing. Many of you may not be knowing, through Right to Information Act, even you can go and get the information of a constable with respect to what is the property he is having, what is the asset he is having, how did he get promoted. Right to Information Act is a very comprehensive. It covers almost all the matters in the governance, not only government, in all the aspects of governance, and it has the widest possible reach. The Act is applicable to government at all levels. Not only that, it is including the recipients of government grants. The people who are getting money from the government are also covered here. Say, for example, an NGO is getting money for implementation, or a contractor is getting some project. All these are covered under RTI. Is this clear to you? It has a wide reach. It includes union government, state government, local government. Not only that, all the people who are receiving recipients of government money are covered. So the scope is very, very broad, comprehensive. Access to information under the Act is extensive with minimal exemptions. With minimal exemptions. So what is the criteria for exemption? What are the things which are exempted, which we have already discussed? The things which are exempted here are, what is the basis for exemption? The basis for exemption is public interest. In public interest, things concerned with national security are exempted. And the things which happen in the parliament, they are exempted. Why? They are exempted in the public interest. Public interest demands, then everything should be given. Right? Right to Information Act is necessary, but not sufficient to improve governance. Please think it over. Right to information is very, very important. It is necessary, but it is not the panacea or it is not the sufficient thing for improvements in government. Why? Because Right to Information Act, a radical shift in our governance culture. This has brought a radical shift from secrecy to transparency. It impacts all the agencies of state permanently, but obviously one single law cannot change everything. One single law cannot change everything. Other than that, because of British legacy laws has been mentioned, like Official Secret Acts, Indian Evidence Act. Because of all these things, there is a clash. There is a clash because Official Secret Act says that keep the information secret. Right to Information says give the information. So there are many laws which are hindrance for the implementation of Right to Information Act. Not only that, added to this, we should also have the things like whistleblower protection, protection of the whistleblowers, decentralization of power, fusion of authority with accountability at all levels. These are some of the things which are needed. Protection of Whistleblowers Act. Who are the whistleblowers? Whistleblowers are those people who report any corruption activity in an organization. Say, for example, I am a constable. In my police station, there is a lot of corruption going on. I want to bring this to the notice of a higher authority or to any other vigilance commission. This can happen only when there is protection. So whistleblowers should be protected. Power should be decentralized, and there is a need of fusion of authority with accountability. Wherever a person has accountable authority, he should have corresponding accountability also. In addition to these things, not only that, as you are aware, governance is a very broad concept, all-encompassing thing. Anything done to maximize the welfare of the citizen can be considered as governance. Governance is a process of collective decision making and its implementation. Governance is a process of policy formulation, collective policy formulation and its implementation. Governance includes processes, procedures, mechanisms, values, convictions. So it's a very huge thing. Governance is a very broad concept in that government is a part. It includes private organization, non-governmental organization, civil society, everything. If it is affecting the welfare of the people, it is included. So in your answer, along with Right to Information Act, there is you need to bring about other concepts which we have discussed in the context of good governance. So all these things are needed, right? Yet another important thing, need of oath of transparency in place of oath of secrecy. As I told you, ministers take oath of secrecy. Second ARC says that please remove this, and in place of that, bring the oath of transparency, right? So these are some of the things with respect to information sharing, Right to Information Act, transparency, accountability. These are all interconnected. You should have a clear understanding and you should have a clear picture how one is related to another, right? Okay. Ethical issues in international relations and funding. It's a very important topic. Now, after the pandemic, many things have changed in the international relations. And also, there were many allegations recently about some NGOs being sponsored by some organizations and even some by external governments, which were hindering the developmental project. Say, for example, a dam is being constructed, thinking that it will irrigate 20,000 hectares of land. A international organization or government funds a NGO to act against this. So in this regard, what are the ethical issues involved? Ethical issues involved in international relations. International relations refers to interaction of the countries with other countries. A simple definition, common sense thing. So what is international relation? It is the interaction of the countries with each other in strategic, economic, political, culture, other spheres, all. This is just an extension of the things. International relations refers to interaction of the countries, right? What are the determinants of ethics in international relations? Think it over. Say India is having some relations with US. India is having some relation with some Arab countries, with Israel. So what are the determinants in the international relations? Number one, first and foremost, it is the national interest. Do you agree? So any relation, first of all, it should take the people of the country, national interest. After that, interests of humanity in general, interests of the whole humanity in general, we have to take into consideration. Next is non-interference into sovereignty of other nations. Say, for example, Jammu and Kashmir. The perception what we have with respect to the problem of Jammu and Kashmir is entirely different from what international agency may view in many cases. Jammu and Kashmir is an internal matter. Say, for example, China. In China, it is said that there are many groups of people like Uyghur Muslims who have been oppressed. It is said that they have been put into some camps where there is human rights violation. If you go on digging like that, every country has something to, in some or the other way, there will be something. Say, for example, Rohingya case in Myanmar. Here, in this scenario, one of the important things is we should not interfere in the other countries' internal matters. Next is treaties and agreements should be taken care of. We have to abide by and we have to respect the treaties and agreements between the nations and also at the international level. And also at the same time, we should also take care of some of the countries which are very friendly to us, especially our neighbors. In general, these are the determinants of ethics in international relations. Dear students, this is the crux, this is the cream of this topic. If you get any topic, if you get any question with respect to the topic of international relations, these are the dimensions in which you have to view the situations. In this direction, at the end, you should conclude the thing with humanity, giving most importance to humanity, universal brotherhood. See, all these countries, nations, they have been evolving. India as a country is a very, very young compared to humanity. Before Britishers came, India was the India what we are seeing was not that. So humanity is the one which matters. There are many processes, many procedures, many laws which may be unethical. And also in democracy, as you are aware, majority always rules. It is number always counts. Number always counts. But you have to take humanity as the main thing. Humanity should be the foremost thing in determining ethics. Management of global commons. What do you understand by global commons? There are some things which are common to all. There are some things which are common to all, where everyone has equal rights. So what does this mean? Two aspects. One is they are common to all. Other thing, putting the things in the other way around, no country has sovereign rights over them. Think it over. What are those kind of things? There are some things on which no country is having sovereign rights. So in this regard, dear students, global commons refers to the resources or areas that lie outside the political reach of any one nation state. So global common refers to those areas or resources which are outside the political authority of a country, right? What are they? International law identifies 4 global commons, namely high seas. High seas, don't get confused. It is a like old English. It means deep seas. High seas, don't imagine high tides. So high seas means deep seas, Antarctica, outer space, atmosphere, and the climate change. In this regard, these are some of the important things which you have to give due consideration. Along with that, intellectual property rights, humanitarian intervention, and technology transfer are the most important things which you should consider. Yes, I will just brief the things. High seas, the open sea, which is not the part of the territorial waters of any country. High seas are those which are not the part of any country. So these are ruled by UN clause, United Nations Convention on the Laws of Sea. Don't you think claiming sovereignty over the high seas is ethically incorrect? This is very, very pertinent because now China has come up with many things saying that historically it has the reach and it has got the authority to the most areas of the South China Sea. It will have many negative repercussions. Let me tell you a example to make the things understand. Say there are think that there are two individuals, or there is think that there is an individual X. When he is talking to others, he is not criticizing others, but he is telling very high of himself always. I am great, I am that, I am this, I am here, I am here. So what does this make? Indirectly, it makes the other person feel low. Similarly, when a country, say for example, Antarctica, Arctic, or any high sea, if a country tries to capture that, try to extend the authority, then it will be having many unintended repercussions. See, it is not coming in your way. It is not affecting any part of your country. But when one is becoming very, very strong, say for example, China. If China gets all the territory, 9-line, all these things. China will be huge. The resources will be huge. So this creates a lot of confusion and also confrontations. So high seas should not be claimed by any country. Then Antarctica. Antarctica, is it the southern end or at the northern end? Antarctica.
Southern
So
end.
Antarctica is here or here?
Southern, sir. Southern.
Okay. So just remember, use always and means it always like walks on the ground. So you can think that has a southern part. So Antarctica is on the southern part. Here, there is a huge ice cover. 98% is ice. Not only that, what is the depth of the ice? It is 1 mile, means 1.6 kilometers. That is the reason why it is not yet occupied. If the ice was only some feet, people would have already. What is the thickness of the ice here? Thickness of the ice is itself 1 mile. But due to advancement of the technology, there have been spoiling of the environment, and also many are trying to explore the resources. So these are the things which should not be done. Next, outer space. Congestion in the outer space risks collision of the satellite and also space war. Say for take the example of Kargil War. In Kargil War, one of the difficulties faced by the Indian troops were the enemy was at the top. Enemy was at the top. Similarly, when you get monopolized, when the outer space gets monopolized by one country, then they'll be having edge over other. It will lead to space war. Climate change. So in this regard, at the center of climate change, we almost always use greenhouse effect. What is this greenhouse effect? Just a question for you. What is greenhouse effect? You often hear this term. Can anyone explain me what is greenhouse effect? Okay, I will explain the thing. There is a house. In this house, plants are grown. In this house, some plants, shrubs, or plants are grown. Why? Why they are grown in this house? To protect these plants from the extreme conditions. Say, for example, what if the temperature goes below 0 degrees Celsius? What will happen? What will happen if the temperature goes below 0 degrees Celsius? Here, majority of the constituents of the plants are water. So water will freeze, so the plant will die. So in order to protect the plant from frost effect, plants are grown in greenhouse. So what is this greenhouse? Let me explain you. The principle. Say here, this is the greenhouse. Or you can take this as a even car, your car. Say for example, you are parking your car in sunlight. You are parking your car in sunlight. When you open the door after some time, it will be very, very hard. Why? The reason is high energy. Please be attentive. High energy solar radiations. High energy solar radiation, they penetrate the glass. After penetrating the glass, they collide with the area present inside. They lose some energy and they are not able to escape again. Previously, when they were coming, incoming radiations, they were having more energy. after they penetrate, they lose a lot of energy. When the energy is low, they cannot escape. This leads to heating up. This is known as greenhouse effect. Same with your greenhouse. This is the greenhouse. Same here. So sun rays come, but they cannot go. So it leads to heating up. Same with respect to Earth. See, this is the our ozone layer, our atmosphere. It is here. While coming, the sun rays are very, very powerful. They come and they hit surface, dust particle, they collide, all these things. Afterward, they lose energy. Once again, they cannot escape. So it leads to warming up of the atmosphere. This is greenhouse effect. So in this regard, with respect to climate change, there is one important aspect, CBDR. CBDR, common but differential responsibilities. What does this mean? With respect to climate change, we have got a common responsibility. All are having the responsibility, whether any country, all are having responsibility. The responsibility is common, but differential responsibilities. What does this mean? It's a very important concept. Countries are divided on the issue of, in respect to climate change, CBDR, common but differential responsibility. Somehow, this is one of the most accepted concept as of now. It means that all countries have common responsibility. All the countries have responsibility to bring the greenhouse gases to prevent the climate change. But that is different. A person who has polluted more. Say, for example, industrial revolution, because of industrial revolution, more and more coal was used. The Western countries have polluted more. The developed countries, they have polluted more. They should be paying more. So they should have more responsibility. That is the meaning. And one more thing is transfer of technology, funding the things. So here, the students, transfer of technology is one of the aspect where there is no agreement. Say, for example, we get a lot of energy by burning coal. Not only we, many developed countries. But we don't have the latest technology. That is one. There are many countries where radioactive material is easily available, but they are not having the technology. And also, there is a lack of agreement with respect to funding. What are the issues with respect to climate change? Common but differential responsibility, transfer of technology, and funding arrangements. Okay. Yet another aspect is humanitarian interventions. There are many countries, say for example, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Nigeria, Congo, where there is a humanitarian crisis, there is a civil war, in fact. In this regard, what are the precautions you should take? Once again, please apply these three important things: national interest, interest of humanity, and non-interference with respect to sovereignty. These are the major things which you have to take into consideration while you are going to any humanitarian intervention. Right. So here is at another one. Last year question. This is the last year question. Technology has the salient factor in international relations. Technology has the salient factor in international relations. Dear students, don't refer any other material. Brainstorm the things. Write a good essay of like the maximum length. Here, what I expect from you is, first of all, technology. Here, what you should do is just come up with more number of points. More number of points. Don't think anything. Afterwards, try to interlink them. The students, please do write an essay on this one and please submit to me. I'll correct the thing and I'll give you. Right. Next, intellectual property rights. This is a very pertinent topic, especially with respect to corona vaccination. Internationally, many important things, technologies are held by intellectual property right. Here, it is very difficult. Getting a new innovation, getting a new product is very difficult because all countries are not having access to new technology. Because of the intellectual property rights, there are many ethical issues involved. Say, for example, corona vaccine. So they say that many Pfizer, Moderna, Sputnik, they are better than some of the vaccines we are having. Don't you think these countries, these individuals who have technology has a moral responsibility to share that one? At the same time, we should also give due importance to international property rights. Very important, my dear students, because you should not always concentrate on the humanitarian thing. If intellectual property rights are not protected, innovation will go down. Nobody will invest. As you are aware, how much time they took to come up with a vaccine? If the same thing is taken by someone and they started replicating, definitely they will be able to produce in a very cheaper price. Say, for example, think Pfizer. I am having a Pfizer vaccine. I have come up with Pfizer vaccine. For this, think that I have spent 10,000 crores of money. 10,000 crores of money. So when I produce any good, somehow I will be adding this cost also. But if there is no intellectual property right, a person will be producing on a larger scale. Say, for example, China will be producing and it will be giving in a cheaper way. So nobody will invest. So here there has to be some balance. There should be a win-win strategy for both of the things. Technology should be shared, and also the person who is coming up with new technology should be given due credit, due recognition, and also the money which he has spent. Here, in the next topic, you have got two important things: ethical issues in international funding. The concept is important here. Funding should not be confused with investment. Funding should not be confused with investment. In general, funding refers to some social purpose. On the other hand, investment is with respect to some business. So here, investment is directly related to profit. It is for business purpose. Wherever there is international funding, say for example, USA is giving some funds to Afghanistan, then there should be no strings attached. Means if you are willing to give it. But don't attach strings like you have to do that, you have to do this. You should not have vested interest. You should not have vested interest. Don't stir up peace and tranquility in a region. Say, for example, this happened in many countries. Many nations are sponsoring some of the terrorists, some of the organizations which are bringing imbalance with respect to peace and tranquility. And it should be like a gesture of soft power. Before you fund anything, you have to consult with the home country. And funds should not be used as a bargaining chip for favors. Say, for example, China. So you are funding, at the same time, you ask for ports. So you have to leave some ports for development. We'll be taking care of these kind of things. These kind of things should not be done in funding. These are very simple, straightforward concepts. Another with respect to clinical training. So here, what is the concept here? Clinical training. Covaxin by Bharat Biotech. Bharat Biotech. Bharat Biotech is a company which has been started by one of my senior. He was my senior in agriculture college, GKVK. Okay. So why this Covaxin not been permitted in many Western countries? Because there were no sufficient clinical trials. Why many of the works, why many of the works are being done in the developed countries, say for example, your BPOs, call centers. Why? Because in the UK or in USA, in America, the cost is very, very high. In India, the labor is cheap. Similarly, some countries, say for example, some like Western country, they have discovered a medicine. They have to go for trial. So what they do, they take participants from the developing countries like Asia and Africa. Here, in say for example, in some of the vaccine trials, it was found that the participants were not aware for what they are come for. So here, consent of the participant is one of the most important thing which has to be taken care, and he has to be given complete information. And also, they should have an obligation for care of the participants after trial. What does this mean? Say for example, vaccination. This trial period is think that it is 1 month. What if some unintended repercussions happen after 1 year? So in clinical trials, these are the two important things which should be taken into consideration. Next, this is a very important topic which is there in news. International Human Rights Humanitarian Non-Government Organization, INGOs. Here, these organizations have been funded to protect human rights. But in many cases, they are in direct conflict with some of the developmental bodies. In this thing, main ethical concern is when a government is funding this organization. Say, for example, US is funding these organizations. If there is anything like that, it will be against the international laws. And also, as you are aware, most of the countries are concerned more about their national interest. So, in case of international funding, especially to NGOs, funding should not be done by the government organization. This is one of the important aspects. Next topic is corporate governance. You know the meaning of governance? What do you understand by corporate? What do you understand by corporate? Dear student, corporate is a legal entity. Please internalize, please give due attention. What is corporate? Corporate is a legal entity. means it is one which is based on some rules, regulation, laws. Say, for example, if there is a company here, if you say that this is corporate, it is not your individual thing. You can't do the way you want. Say, for example, there is a kirana shop or there is a showroom which belongs to you. Individual ownership. If you have individual ownership, we can't say that that is corporate. Corporate is a legal entity where everything is defined in terms of rules and regulations and law. Corporate is a legal entity that separates it from its owner. Right? So corporate is a legal entity. It is separate from the owners. And it is a legal entity when I say that it is like a body which can be sued. It is like an entity. It can make profit, it can be taxed, it is legally liable. Since it is a legal entity, there will be a great need for keeping the records, reporting all these things. Right? Next, corporate governance. What is this? You should have one definition for all the things which are present in ethics. Corporate governance refers to the collection of mechanisms, processes, and relations by which corporations are controlled and operated. I repeat, these are some totality of all the things, some totality of the legal things. In this respect, you will be having rights and responsibilities, and also how decisions should be done are guided by the law which is binding on all these things. It is all encompassing with respect to the corporate. Right? Next is with respect to participants in corporate governance. For the participants, please think it over. A company, corporate company. Who are the participants? These are the participants. Shareholders, board of directors, managers, creditors, auditors, regulators. Dear students, in this regard, like I'll be briefly explaining these things, because if you don't understand these things, you can't answer the question. Two important things which are often confused are with respect to shareholders and creditors. Shareholders and creditors. Let me take an example for this. Say, for example, there is a company. For this, say, for example, me, Raghu. Raghu is giving 100 crores for this company. 100 crores for this company. Another case, there are many who are buying shares of this company. Here, one important aspect is shareholders are the owners of the company. Shareholders are owners of the company. Say, for example, if you are owning, say, 25% share of that company, means you own that company 25%. Right? Are you getting the concept? Shareholders are the owners of the company. These owners have taken 100 crores. 100 crores. Say, for example, in 1 year, this company is getting 150 crores profit. 150 crores profit. In this, first, out of this 150, 100 crores should go to the creditors because you have taken money from them. Afterwards, you will be left with 50 crores. This profit will be shared among the shareholders. Clear? So Shareholders are the owners of the company. Creditors are not the owners of the company. Right? This concept should be pretty clear to all of you. Then moving forward, board of directors. Shareholders elect board members. In that you have two kinds, inside directors. Those directors will be majority shareholders, founders, the executives. Independent directors, these are there because of their experience. They can manage the things. So one important thing, who will appoint the board of directors? The shareholders. Shareholders communication. So who will communicate to the shareholders all the information? Chief Executive Officer commonly communicate with the public about the public at shareholder meeting or in press conference, right? So here CEO, Chief Executive Officer, is in the management. So he will be communicating the things, but the ultimate responsibility is with the board. So sharing the information, ultimate responsibility is with the board. Chief Executive Officer will be communicating the information. Appointment. So shareholders will be appointing board of directors and board of directors will be appointing management. Very simple. You should have fair understanding of this. Shareholders, why they are appointing? Because they are the owners of the company. They're the owners of the company. On the other hand, creditors are not the owners. They will appoint board of directors will appoint management. Then who will report to whom? The other way. Here, see, board of directors have appointed managers. So managers will report to board of directors. Then board of directors will report to shareholders. See, please understand the movement of reporting and the appointment. They go in the opposite direction. So reporting management to the board of directors to the shareholders. Don't go in depth. Have this much idea. This is more than sufficient. Next, with respect to another important is auditors. Auditors. Who are these? These are the people who will be inspecting what is going on. These auditors are also appointed by the shareholders, and these auditors will be reporting to the shareholders. These auditors inspect what the management is doing. Afterwards, they report to the shareholders, right? And another one, you have got regulators. These are the government organizations, government bodies will be regulating the things. Right? Corporate citizenship. This is a very important concept and it is very closely related to corporate social responsibility, which you often hear. The idea that corporates have rights and duties is the meaning of corporate citizenship. So who is a citizen? Citizen is a person who has got rights and also obligation in the form of duties. Please bear this in mind. So you have got like part 1 in like part 2 of your constitution is about citizenship. Who are citizens? If you are a citizen, you have got certain rights. At the same time, you have got certain obligation in the form of duties. This concept, when you apply that to a corporation, that is corporate citizenship. Means corporates also have some rights. At the same time, they have some liabilities and also duties also. Corporate social responsibility is a broader concept, of corporate citizenship. Corporate social responsibility. So let me just break down this one. Corporate is a legal entity. What is social? It is referring to society, means people, responsibility. Why corporate should have social responsibility. Why corporate should have social responsibility? In this regard, there are many ways of explaining the things, but the most optimum is that here, with respect to these things, corporate social responsibility was not explicitly present till recently. It has become a buzzword now. Why is it? Say I told you, think that this is governance. Governance. In this governance, previously, most of the work was done by government. Most of the work was done by government, right? In many cases, the complete area. Everything with respect to society was done by the government. But due to our LPG, government is rolling back liberalization, privatization, globalization. This is the order of the day. Government is rolling back, means it is restricted to a very smaller area now. At the same time, who is filling this gap? This gap is filled by your corporate. Since now the corporates are giving goods and services, they also have responsibility for the society. And not only that, how are the corporates making profit? From the people. So people are their clients. So they have got some responsibilities also. In the LPG era, the corporate responsibility is very high. Why? Because government is becoming small day by day, rollback of the state. Market is filling that vacuum. Corporate social responsibility. A company's responsibility towards society. It is the commitment to ethical behavior by creating a balance between the needs of the shareholders, community, environment in the surrounding area. A very precise definition. Here, you have got a responsibility. Here, you have to balance the things with respect to shareholders. Shareholders, they are the owners, community, the society, and also the environment. Right? What are the benefits of corporate social responsibility? A very general one. It helps to forge a strong bond between the employee and the corporation. They can boost the moral and can help both the employee and employer feel more connected with the world around them, boosting their own brand. So those will be involved in corporate responsibility. Say for example, Infosys. Infosys has taken some of the villages around this factory or somewhere. So it is taking care of the education of this area. So there happens a bond. Now, by this, there is also a goodwill among the people. Your brand will go, right? Next, why corporate responsibility? As I explained you, one of the reason, liberalization, privatization, globalization. Here, the state, the government is rolling back. Corporate is providing more and more services. So the responsibility of the corporate towards the people is also increasing, right? What are the conflicts of interest in corporate governance? Here, there are two important things. One is shareholders and upper management. That is called principal agent problem. And among the shareholders also, there is some conflict of interest. That is principal. What is that? In case of principal agent conflict, see here, there is no need for you to remember principal agent. Just broader understanding is enough. Upper management. Here, the management wants more pay. Management is concerned with short-term goals to personal benefit, but shareholders are the owners. They are concerned with long-term profits. See, if the management is getting more pay, definitely profit will decrease. So here there is a conflict of interest with respect to upper management and the shareholders. Similarly, principal conflict. In this, individual shareholders, that is big shareholders, say for example, who are possessing 10%, 20%, 30%. So they lobby upper management to act in their individual interest. This is principal conflict. So ethical concerns or bad corporate governance refers to their place where auditors are not appropriately selected, because auditors are the one who will be inspecting the management. If the auditors are not acting independently, it will be very bad corporate governance. Poorly structured boards, because boards will be the one which will be controlling the management, which will be looking after the things. Insider trading, if the company will be going to some acquisitions, some policies. So these policies will be known to the people who are working inside the company. They won't be available to the shareholders. This information is misused. Insider trading, corporate social responsibility with vested interest. We took up the example of a shopkeeper and the child. Shopkeeper is honest, but the interest is not good. Similarly, if you have got corporate social responsibilities with vested interest, these are very bad. And in fact, these are the ethical concerns, right? Moving forward, work culture. What do you understand by work culture? Can anyone say what is culture? A very important thing. Anyone, what is culture?
The way of living life.
Very good. Can you elaborate? Very good. Nicely said. Way of living. Elaborate, please. Can you elaborate?
The way of living changes from the society where we live. In a different society, there's a different way of culture.
Okay. Okay. Let me explain you this. Let me explain. I'll give a brief idea with respect to civilization also. Okay. Culture. Before that, work. What is work? Work refers to any labor, force, energy, or sum of all these things, or the effort required to produce a specific result. Right? If you want to produce a specific result, you have to put energy, force, labor, effort, or anything. This is called as work. What is culture? Culture is that which is learned. Culture is that which is learned. If it is not learned, it is not cultural. Say, for example, hairs we are growing. This is not cultural. Negroes having woolly hair. Mongolites having a very silky hairs. This is not cultural because it is not learned. Culture is shared or accepted by most members of the population. Right? If there is only a certain 1 or 2% of the population, if they are doing something, it is not cultural. It should be shared and accepted by most members of the society. It is passed on from one generation to another generation. These are the three important things which are there in the culture. In totality, culture refers to the total way of life. See, in this regard, anything sorry, anything which is passed on from one generation to another, which is accepted by most member of the population, which is learned. Your IQ, no. Say for example, North Indians, they are taller. South Indians, they are short. South Indians in some areas, they are darker. North Indians, they are fair color. Is this cultural? No. Why? It is not learned. Culture refers to the total way of life. It can be with respect to your values, the material, anything, the way you eat, the way you eat, the way you pray. It includes the material, non-material aspects, the symbols, everything. Is the concept of culture clear to you? Culture refers to those which are learned, accepted by most members, and passed on from generation to generation. In many cases, I have seen some people saying it is hereditary. No, this is wrong. Culture is not hereditary. It is passed on from generation to generation, not through blood, through our customs, through our traditions. Right? Culture refers to the total way of life, the way you, in some societies, how they wash the clothes, to something like more profound, like music, art. All these are part of culture, right? So please understand here, society refers to group of people living in a definite territory. So to be more precise, society is an association of people living in a definite territory, right? So what is the crux? Society means people. The way of life of this society, the way of life of this people is called culture. Is this concept clear to you? Very important conceptual clarity in this regard. To simplify the things, society refers to people. Society refers to association of the people. Society refers to association of the people in a given area, in a particular area. If you write that, more than sufficient. Or just remember, for simplicity, society refers to people. Culture refers to the way of life of these people, sum total of everything. So work culture refers to the same cultural things in a working environment, in an organization. Means it includes everything which are passed on from one employee to the another. Don't take the literal meaning here. I'm just trying to explain the concept. So work culture refers to every aspect of the organization, every aspect in the work of an organization. So here they have asked, see how ethics paper is related to essay. Here, see here, culture is what we are. As it is defined, culture is total way of life. Civilization is what we have. In this, a distinction is needed. Civilization refers to that aspect of the culture, which is developed after the writing came into existence. So the things which we have built after the writing, those things are referred to as civilizations, right? Work culture is a set of values carried forward from long time in an organization. The same concept. Culture refers to the total way of working in an organization. Culture refers to the same concept in organization. Everything in organization. A substantial has a substantial impact on behavior, quality, quantity of the work done by the employees in an organization. Importance of healthy work culture. Why we should have a healthy work culture? If we have a healthy work culture, the individual will be enjoying the time and effort, will be loyal towards the organization, towards the work. Employees stick to the organization. See, you might have heard, say for example, Infosys. Once they join, almost they will be there in that organization. Many till they retired. Why? They have got a very healthy work culture. The image of Japan and Singapore, what we have got a very good image. This is all because of the healthy work culture. Not only that, a very important aspect is a healthy work culture brings everyone to a common platform. A healthy work culture brings everyone into a common platform. This common platform brings a we feeling among them. There will be give and take. It also leads to greater satisfaction. It increases the individual productivity, production, organization production, everything. Nature of Indian work culture. Indian work culture here is hierarchy. In Indian work culture, we have got hierarchy system. Decision making is generally top down. Decisions are taken at the bottom. No, decisions are always taken at the top, and they are passed down to the bottom where they have to be implemented, right? Then power is vested with the seat. Here, a person hierarchy. In this hierarchy, say for example, in the top of the hierarchy, the power is vested in this. It is not having correspondence with the talent. In an organization, power and authority should be vested with a person who is having the talent, who is having the capacity to work, who is having more knowledge, not to the seat. Authority and power should be vested with the work, not with the seat. But in India, it is vested in the seat. Accountability is very low and the blame thrown on the lower people always. If something goes wrong, always it is the lower order people. Indian work culture is said to be a leisure work culture. Leisure work culture. What does this mean? Leisure work culture. In India, the way of life, way of working of an organization is giving more importance, and it is towards leisure, not production or productivity. Leisure work culture. India has more professionally qualified people than professionals. What do you understand by this? India has more professionally qualified people than professionals. Your BTech is a professional degree. Medicine is a professional degree. So you have got more professionally qualified people, but they are not professional. And another thing, they neglect the work-life balance. As I said, there is a hierarchy in that. To climb in that hierarchy, they sacrifice their personal life. This shouldn't happen. There should be a balance between work and the private life. What impacts work culture? Please think it over. A company has a work culture. A organization has a work culture. What impacts the work culture?
Behavior of the employees.
Okay, behavior of the employees. Then
The environment in which the employees are working.
environment. Then anyone, please shoot the points.
The board of directors.
Board of directors. Okay, then good. At least you tried to assimilate some of the things which I have already told. Then good, well tried. If you were not told, not a problem. At least you might have at least thought in your thought process as to what are the things on which the work culture depends. Generally, work culture depends upon the founders. Work culture of Infosys depends on the founders. Work culture of Amazon depends on Jeff Bezos. Work culture of Tesla depends upon the founder. Like the leadership, it depends on the leadership. What is the defining character of leadership? What is the one important character a leader should have? A very, very important character of a leader. When can we call that individual as a leader? Means when he can influence, others. So what is the defining character of a leader? Influence. Whatever the may be the methods. Leader is one who is capable of influencing. Then management, workplace practices, the policies and philosophies of the organization, the people who are there, the mission, vision, and the values of the organization, and the mode of communication of the things. All these things impact work culture. Then characteristics of healthy work culture. Please give me the points. What are the characteristics of healthy work culture? Say, for example, you want to have a company, a good company. As I told you, work culture refers to everything.
Fixed
What do you
working
expect in
hours.
that company? Go ahead.
Fixed working hours.
Fixed work hours. Okay. Then
Recognition.
very good. Recognition. You don't need salary.
Success.
Okay, salary. Then
It should balance professional and personal life.
okay, that like that will be an individual thing, may not be work culture, because it is left to you whether you are balancing or not. In an organization, okay, let me explain these things. See, when you think, you'll remember these things forever. Characteristics of a healthy work culture. In this, there should be clear goals and rewards for the employees. There should not be any ambiguity. The goal should be clear, and whomsoever they are achieving, they should be rewarded. Whomsoever they are not rewarded, not achieving the goal, some not giving those rewards. Not only that, a very, very important concept is with respect to hygienic factor and motivation factors. What is this? Let me explain this. Hygienic factors, example, status, job security, and salary. Let us take an hospital. In this hospital. Operation. Operation. A patient comes for operation. Please concentrate. This term is related to this context. A patient comes for operation. Operation is the most important thing for which a person has come. Say, for example, kidney transplant, something like that. But after he comes to, like when will be at bed, there are no hygienic factors. There is no cleanliness. Injections are not given after sterilization. Can that patient survive? No. So here, hygienic factors are important. They are the minimum basic things required. So let me make the concept clear to you. Hygienic factors are those factors which are very much essential. These are, you can say, these are the things. If these things are present, then it will be in a zero condition. Means it won't let the organization go negative. On the other hand, there are some factors known as motivational factors, like recognition, achievement, personal growth. Please note these hygienic factors: recognition, achievement, a sense of accomplishment, and there is personal growth. If, see, please concentrate here, hygienic factors are necessary. Hygienic factors are very, very necessary. But by just hygienic factors, the disease won't be cured. Hygienic factors are necessary for curing the disease, right? Cleanliness is necessary for curing the disease. Similarly, status, job security, salary, these have to be present. In addition to hygienic factor, you also should have motivational factors. Motivation factors are those things which keep the employee working. It is the one which makes the work culture healthy. So here, dear students, please don't make the mistake that in a healthy work culture, motivational factors should be there, but also hygienic factors also should be there. It is the bare minimum required. Are you getting me? For a patient to get cured, hygienic factor, hygiene, being hygienic is the bare minimum required. Right? Other than that, there is a need of surgery, all these things. These are motivational factors. In a healthy work culture, you should have these two things. You should have hygienic and also motivational factors. Next, Citizens Charter. I have explained this thing already. What do you understand by Citizens Charter? Can anyone try to elaborate the thing? Any inputs? Citizens Charter. Okay, I'll explain the things. Very simple. Citizen Charter is a number one commitment. So what is the Citizen Charter? Citizen Charter is a commitment. Who is providing this commitment? A person who is providing services. Service provider. So service provider is providing a commitment with respect to the quality, quantity, everything, every aspect of the service. Right? Is this clear to you? Citizens Charter is a commitment provided by the service providing organization. with respect to everything, every aspect. Along with that, there is one what is known as redressal of the grievances if this commitment are not upheld. If these commitments are upheld, where you have to do what you have to. A best example, most of you might have gone to bank. Nowadays, like people are not going that much. Like when I was young, to get even 100 rupees, 200 rupees, 300 rupees, invariably we have to go to bank. When ATM came, like people like got astonished, and it was the talk in most of the villages. They always used to say, there is one mission which is giving money. Like unbelievable at that time. Things have changed, everything, like just some past some 20, 30 years, the relations what we have, the method of communication, mode of communication was entirely different. Say for example, when I was like, now I am 42, when I was in high school and let's say 10th standard, then phone was very like a very luxurious thing. Only few used to have phone. If you want to meet some friend, some of your friends, what we have to do? We have to go around their house. We have to make some noise. Like we used to have bicycle, bell, ringing the bell, or singing some song or talking loudly. Say for example, if you want to get any service, if you want to meet anyone, or if you want to give invitation, they used to go to a marketplace, weekly marketplace. That is the only place where they used to meet all the things. That is the only place they used to get the services. Things have changed. Coming to the point, Citizens Charter. When you enter a bank, often you find a board where they mention what are the services they are providing. Also, what if these services are not provided, what you can do? This is Citizens Charter. Let me elaborate this in a systematic way. This chapter, the what I'm teaching is very important because all the things have taken from the most authenticated source, that is your second ARC report. Evolution of Citizens Charter. For the first time, it evolved in UK in 1991. In India, 1997. So, Citizen Charter as a concept is very new. See here, your LPG era, don't think it began in 1990s in India only. No, throughout the world, to a greater extent, plus or minus 5 years. This is the era during liberalization, privatization, globalization. Then in UK, they came up with Citizens Charter. In India from 1997. Citizens' rights, laws, and duties. Here, let me elaborate this. Person who is entitled to enjoy all the legal rights. So who is citizen? Before we define what is Citizens Charter, let us first have an idea of who is a citizen. Who enjoys legal rights and privileges, at the same time he has got obligations to obey its laws and to fulfill its duties. Very important. Citizen is one who has got the privilege, who is entitled to it with some rights and privilege. At the same time, he has got obligation. This obligation is two-dimensional, or it includes two things. One is obeying these laws and also fulfilling his duties. Charter. Charter is a grant of authority or right. So here, citizens are granted authority. Citizens are granted rights. This is Citizen Charter. Means, what does this mean? It means citizens' rights. Charter means rights. So citizens' rights. What are these citizens' rights? These rights or getting a commitment from the organization. Citizens' right to begin with, in the most simplified and yet authentic way, is a set of commitments made by an organization. Set of commitments made by an organization regarding the standards of service which it delivers. Okay, if you write that, it's more than sufficient. Any concept in ethics, you can deal with this one. This should be the basis. It is a set of commitments given by the organization with respect to the standards of services it will be delivering. Citizen chapter is a separate chapter in second ARC report. In that they have mentioned a quote also. So in this, Mahatma Gandhi says that customer is the most important visitor in our premises. He is not dependent on us. We are dependent on him. He is not an interruption in our work. He is the purpose of it. He is not an outsider in our business. Whatever we do is for him itself. Okay, Citizens Charter features, what are they? What is the heart of the Citizen Charter? What if in case of default? So here at the heart of Citizen Charter is your commitment, and they are enforceable. And also in case of any default, there will be redressal of the grievances. So here, these are the three important things on which the whole Citizen Charter is built on. It's an important chapter, and it is having more practical application also. Dear students, this is a little long. It will take little long. So we'll continue this topic tomorrow. I'll give in-depth understanding of the topic, right? Okay.